we're continuing in a series we've been in entitled Divine Declarations, in which we hear Jesus declare who he was before he went to be crucified and before he would rise again. And so we have looked at these particular statements that we find in the Gospel of John, in which Jesus declares, I am, and he's using and drawing from the very name of God when he says that, because prior, when God says, do you want to know who I am? I am that I am. I am the one who is above and all things, the source of all things. And so Jesus is drawing that as a declaration, but he then adds, might call it a metaphor, to not only have it be a divine declaration, but a divine revelation of who he is, who that identity is, and who he's meant to be to us. So we've heard over these weeks that he is the bread of life, that he is the true vine, as Josh shared with us a couple of weeks ago, that he is the light of the world, as Ron shared with us last week. And all of these revelations they're really ultimately an invitation to us, an invitation to recognize who he is meant to be to us, and ultimately what it means to receive who he is to us. And this morning we come around Jesus declaring this to us, that I am the good shepherd. I am the good shepherd, Jesus says to us. And I invite us to open our hearts to what that really means, how that is meant to fall and land within our own souls. And I think for many of us, when we hear that Jesus is the good shepherd, it opens up something to us of realizing his care for us, God's care for us, that he wants to come. And we might even imagine the picture that has been done as a painting of Jesus carrying a sheep over his shoulders and holding them, and we recognize that care. But on the other hand, it can be a little difficult for us because, well, it means that our part is what? We're cast as sheep. And that is not necessarily the greatest compliment anybody has ever given to you, to refer to you as a sheep, to refer to myself as a sheep. I mean, if you think about it, you know, when one puts out before people one of those classic questions like, hey, if you could be any animal, what would you like to be? You do hear all sorts of things, but I have never heard anyone say, I'd like to be a sheep. That's like that just really would be what I would aspire to be, what I'd like to identify in. It just doesn't happen. If you think about sports mascots, I mean, there's just endless, right? Anybody watching March Madness? There are 64 teams in the men's bracket, 64 in the women's bracket. I mean, it's all there, everything. Not one team that's called the sheep. Like, it just doesn't inspire something in us, you know? And like if you've ever, been interested in animals and what they can do and how they can be trained, and we think, animals can be pretty bright. Like you go to the circus and there's the tiger show and there's even the elephant show. There is not one trained sheep show. Like there's just a sense in which they're not that bright. And so we kind of get the hint a little bit, and it can be a little hard for us to want to take in the idea that we're sheep. And I would suggest to you and I this morning, that's exactly what we need to take in. Because it speaks of the fact that despite the fact that in many ways humanity is bright and has been able to engage so many things, the reality is on a spiritual level, we are those that are wandering and unable to grasp so much. And that is the point, that we are vulnerable spiritually. And what we need to grasp with that is the fact that while we're vulnerable, we are also incredibly valuable. And that is the picture. When Jesus at one point is looking upon the crowds and he's been healing people and engaging them, it says he looked upon the crowds and he saw them as sheep without a shepherd. And he says his heart was moved by this depth of compassion. Because here's the truth, the way God sees us. Incredibly valuable. The one that one goes and searches for, but also incredibly vulnerable. Valuable and vulnerable. That's the reality that God wants us to understand. And this is why we see that God would look upon the people as those who need shepherds, and that role of shepherd was so significant and a real parallel to what was needed for the human soul. And so we see that in the Middle East, if you look, sheep are deeply valued. And shepherds have a role of being the ones who go out, and it's messy, and they weren't deemed to be very clean lives, but they're the ones who go out and are providing and protecting and guiding those sheep. And so it is that it shouldn't be surprising to us that in the Middle East you've got Abraham, the father of all faith, who was a shepherd. And you have Jacob, who followed him, was a shepherd. And Moses, one of the most fascinating of all lives, is raised, as you might remember, in Pharaoh's house, in royalty, and he learns great leadership from that. And after 40 years, he kind of strikes out on his own, like, and it doesn't work. And then God sends him out, goes out into the desert, where he learns for 40 years how to be a shepherd. Then God calls him back. You get the idea that leaders were meant to be those who knew something about what it means to be a shepherd, what it means to care for the vulnerable that way. And so precisely we hear God speak through the prophet Ezekiel and also Jeremiah, where God speaks and says this to them: "You have failed me as shepherds," to the leaders of Israel, to those priests. "You have failed to do this." And he's very, very clear, and I wish we had time to go through. It's so striking. But he says this: instead of sacrificing yourself for the sheep, you took from them. You were not sacrificial, you were selfish. Then he goes on in the next portion through the prophet Ezekiel, and he says, "And now my sheep are left wandering. They're lost, and you did not go and search for the lost sheep." And then at the end, he comes back around and he says, "And so therefore, since you have failed, I am going to become the shepherd of the sheep." That's exactly what he says. I, God, will now come and be the shepherd of the sheep. That's what he sets up. You have failed, but I will now do it. And then through the prophet Micah, he says very specifically this, and it's read over the birth of Jesus. He says, "But you, Bethlehem," where Jesus was born, he's referring back to the prophet speaking this over 1,000 years before. He says, "But you, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will be" what? "The shepherd of my people Israel." This is what God had prophesied, that he would raise one up from Bethlehem. But the text that he's quoting from Micah also goes on and states this: "Whose goings forth are from of old, from everlasting." Many people miss that. But he's saying that this one who will rise up as a shepherd is not merely from days of old in earthly history, but from everlasting, coming from eternity itself. And so now we can begin to hear the heart of God being fulfilled. We can hear how the very heart of God is now being fulfilled in the one who came, in Jesus. And so I invite you to pick up in the Gospel of John, where Jesus is telling us something about himself in relationship to sheep. In John 10, it says, Jesus says, "The man who enters by the gate is the shepherd of his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls his own sheep by name and leads them out. When he has brought out all of his own, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and go out and find" what? "And find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. I am the good shepherd, he repeats. I know my sheep, and my sheep know me. Just as the Father knows me, and I know the Father, and I lay down my life for the sheep. I have other sheep that are not of this sheep pen. I must bring them also. They too will listen to my voice, and there shall be one flock and one shepherd. The reason my Father loves me is that I lay down my life, only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. And here, Jesus is bringing to us this grand declaration: I am the good shepherd. He is the good shepherd. And we need to hear that word, the, because it says so much. He is not a shepherd. He is the shepherd. And Jesus makes it very, very clear. He's distinguishing himself from all others that in any way might be shepherds to our souls. He says the man who enters by the gate does so because the sheep are who? Are his sheep. The watchman opens the gate for him, speaking of how the Father makes the way possible and brings Jesus to them, and the sheep listen to his voice. He calls who? His own sheep by name, and he leads them out. Unlike one who does not know them, unlike one who cannot claim them to be his own, he comes to us as the one who does claim that we are his. And he explains the hired hand is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. And in here, Jesus is declaring just what God had said, that many had failed, but he is coming as the one who actually owns them, who actually claims them because they are his. Because unlike any other, he's coming for those who were created in his image to be his. And he wants us to understand that he's not only distinguishing himself from all of the failures of the priests and the mediators, that there is no mediator who can fulfill that, but I think he's saying to us in many ways, we need to realize that nobody can. Nobody who is a mediator, even if in some ways they were set apart to be so or entrusted to be so, can ever truly be the shepherd of our souls. And for some of us, we need to really take that in. Because in many ways, we do look for a shepherd of our souls. We do look for someone who will really care for us. And some of us know deeply that we have been drawn to somebody who we hoped would, and ultimately found ourselves disappointed, and ultimately find ourselves feeling like, am I really alone in this world? Will anybody really care? And maybe you're one who's, you've had in your life somebody who you came to believe would really, really care for you. And that you thought, well, this is it. I found somebody who really knows me, really cares for me. They'll take care of all of my problems. They're going to be there for me all the time. Man, they are going to fix everything in my life. And then you find out they seem to have needs of their own and desires of their own and limits to their own grace and limits to their own love. And you find yourself in a place in which you're deeply disappointed, and you find yourself almost in a place in which you feel like maybe nobody cares for me. Or maybe you say, well, I don't need anybody. You come to the point where to guard yourself, you say, you know what, I'm just going to be my own shepherd of my soul. I'm not going to trust anybody, and so you just live in kind of a detachment. And we can find ourselves in that place between disappointment and detachment. But Jesus is saying to us, if you're looking for that shepherd, if you're wondering, is there a shepherd? And we all are looking for that kind of shepherd who would care for us, who would come find us, really find us. Jesus says, it's me. I am that shepherd. I'm the shepherd that you've been looking for. Deep in your soul, I'm the one who can come and say, you're mine. And I'm the only one who can say that. And this is what he wants us to be able to hear. And when we realize that he is the one who comes to be that we're valued by his care, that we are his sheep, we begin to open ourselves to then, what does it mean? And so I want to note this, that the Good Shepherd has come. That's what Jesus tells us. And to those who respond to his voice, the first thing we need to grasp is this, that he finds us. That he finds us and he knows the way home for the soul which is lost. This is what Jesus said about himself. Above all, he stated very clearly, I have come for this purpose. And when you hear that, you should say, well, what is the purpose? Like, who is Jesus? He says, I've come to seek and to save the lost. That is what I have come for. That I've come to seek and save the lost. That he is the one who comes, and like a good shepherd who, even if one sheep is missing, just one, they make their way out because they know that is so significant they must find that sheep. This is what Jesus was describing about himself. And he actually describes this in the Gospel of Luke, and you may remember these words if you're not familiar with them. In Luke 15, Jesus says, we learn that Jesus, in this context, the tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. But the Pharisees and the teachers of the law muttered, this man welcomes sinners and eats with them. They're trying to make sense. Like, why is Jesus out there with all these people who seem to have their lives so messed up? Then Jesus told them this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Does he not leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? Until he finds it. He's not telling the story of something entirely strange. That is the heart of a good shepherd. They don't just go, oh, well, that one's missing. They don't just feel indifferent to it. They were entrusted with what is usually other people's sheep to be protecting and to bring home at night. And he's saying they would leave. And I am that good shepherd that is now leaving others that I've protected to go find the one who is not. And I will find the lost. And you need to know that there is a shepherd who is searching for you. There's a shepherd who goes out to find each of the sheep because he knows them that distinctly. He knows you that distinctly. That is what Jesus is saying. And we've all wandered. That is the truth that we have to kind of come to terms with. God declared through the prophet Isaiah, we have all strayed like sheep. You know how sheep are. They kind of, their head gets down in the grass and they just follow it along until they realize they're lost. We have all strayed like sheep. Each one of us has turned to go his own way. Now, I know some may think, well, I don't feel lost. And I totally understand that. Many people would say, like, I don't know, I just don't really identify with feeling lost per se. And I think that is something that we see, as I said, with sheep. Like, sheep don't really even know they're lost. Like, they just kind of are kind of so simple-minded. They put their head down and they just kind of follow and eat some grass and they just wander. And they're kind of familiar with whatever's right in front of them until they realize they're not, if they ever realize it at all. And in many ways, it's kind of like a kid who, is going to Toys R Us or Target with their parents. And, they're right there with their parents and kind of need to tag along. But then they slip away and they make their way over to the toy section. And they get to that toy section and they begin to just like marvel at what's in front of them. And they get so deeply immersed in it and familiar, and they're reading comic books and their whole imagination is caught up in that little world of fantasy they found in the toy section until they're not. Until the moment where they suddenly go, oh my, wait a minute. I'm in this toy section, kind of lost in this. Where's my parent? Where's the one who can take care of me? And in that moment, they have to go through that process where they realize a few things. One is like, I don't know how to navigate this. This store, this is way bigger than I understand. That I am in something much larger than I can navigate. And secondly, I need somebody bigger than me, someone who has what I don't have, a capacity I don't have to find my way through this. And lastly, I'm not going to get home because I don't know how to get home. That's the reality that strikes. And in many ways, you and I can be like that, where we find ourselves in life and we just are so focused on our toys, so to speak, and our toys are great until we realize they're just toys. And then we realize that we're not really Batman. we're not really all that we have been imagining and getting caught up into. And it's in that moment when we realize I am lost. I am really lost, as the scriptures would say. I have become separated from the source of my existence. So who am I really? Where am I really? That's the place in which we must find ourselves, we must get to. And I think it's especially relevant for so many of us who live on the West Coast out here, because we kind of live in the place in which our own large country, goes to what? To find themselves. Like go west and go to Los Angeles and San Francisco. There, white, because you're going to what? Find your dreams. You're going to really find out who you really are, because you need to get away from those old roots and reference points to find who you are. Only to come to that place in which so many come to, where they realize that so much now of what I have tried to make of myself feels very shallow. It feels very lost. I feel like I'm just trying to fit in and become like everyone else, but I'm not even sure what that means. And when I look around, I'm not sure anybody knows who they are. And it's in that moment that one wakes up and realizes that we can have all the pleasures, but we don't know who we are. And that's the reality in which Jesus meets us. Beneath all of us, we wonder really if we can be found. And there, Jesus says that he is the shepherd who is able to find us. When I'm lost and I can't really find myself, because the reality is I can't merely find myself within myself. It has to come from outside to really locate who I am, what I was meant to be. We need one who is greater and truer, who is coming from everlasting and grasps the reality of who I ultimately am, and that's it. And looking back on my own life, I think back to that own process, and it might seem a little vague, but there's these moments that maybe you identify with when you realize that in many ways you felt lost and you found God, but you realize, like I do looking back, I didn't find God. God found me. That I was becoming found by God. That is why the declaration of the song, Amazing Grace, is one that so many easily come into and sing, because it's a song that God would have us sing. I once was lost, but now I'm found. Not now I found, but I was found. That is the heart of what God has for us. And when we're found, we realize that he knows us and that we've been his. The Bible says that the condition of all of us is this longing to be known, but this paradox, or this ultimate underlying challenge. I want to be known, but I don't even want to be seen. Because what I'm afraid of is that if I was really seen, I will be one who is so flawed, one that nobody could possibly value. And so we live in this paradox. I want to be seen and known, but I don't want to be seen. And what Jesus is saying right here, as he declares himself the good shepherd of your soul and mine, is that I see you, I know my sheep. I know you like you don't even know yourself. I know who you are because you're mine. You are my sheep, and you're valuable. So valuable, I still come for you. And this is what is so profound. We may fear being found, but he is the one that finds us and values us. And that leads to the second point this. But the good shepherd has come, and to those who respond to his voice, he will lay down his life. He will lay down his life. Why? Because we're that valuable to him. Because we're his, because we were meant and created to be his. Jesus said, I am the good shepherd. The good shepherd lays down his life for the sheep. The hired hand, he says, is not the shepherd who owns the sheep. So when he says he sees the wolf coming, he abandons the sheep and runs away. Nobody will stay with you the way that only God can, because only God knows what you're really about. You're valuable to him, not because of what you have to offer him. You're valuable because of what you were meant to be for him. That's the difference. And that's what he comes to bring. I lay down my life only to take it up again. No one takes it from me, but I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to take it up again. What makes all the false shepherds similar is that they are not really even willing to lay down their life. As God said that other people will ultimately have their own selfish needs. That's because everybody has needs. And you will never be able to find that which will come and give themselves so fully for you. And the uniqueness of Jesus as the shepherd is that he's the one who lays down his life. But notice that it's very important to grasp. It does not say that he merely has his life taken from him. Jesus wants to make this incredibly clear. He goes out of his way to say something to us. No one takes this. I give it. I give it voluntarily. I lay down my life. I make a choice to do this. No one takes it from me. He sees the destiny of the sheep. He sees the danger. He sees the separation. And that separation will ultimately lead to their death. And this is what the scriptures really describe for us as the meaning of what it means to be in a state of sin. We can speak of all sorts of actions that reflect that. But ultimately, the state of sin means that we're in a state in which we're in a position to say, I want to rule my own life. I want to be the one who has my own kingdom. And the whole point is that there is only one kingdom. There is only one life. And God rules over it. And if we declare ourselves outside of it, we're declaring ourselves in this defiant independence to be separate from God and separated from life. And that is what Jesus sees. That is what he comes to. And that is why he comes for us, to resolve that separation. Because when we declare ourselves to be those who say, like, well, you know, I'm my own person and I'm just going to have charge of my own life. What we're really doing is we're stealing property that doesn't belong to us. You don't belong to yourself. You belong to God. I belong to God. And if I steal what is his and I take it outside away from him, then I'm living in separation. Jesus comes to that very condition in which we have separation. And the consequences of that is that we will suffer separation. We will find ourselves in the, oh my gosh, I have been forsaken by the one I needed so much, by the one I belong to. That is what Jesus takes upon himself on the cross. This is why as he comes to suffer, it is not only the physical suffering that he goes through for us, which itself is so profound, but it is him on the cross crying out, Father, why have you forsaken me? Because he's declaring how we must face that kind of separation. He takes that upon himself so that we would never have to take it upon ourselves. That is why he comes and he lays it down. That is why it means that as we come next week and through this week towards the suffering of Jesus, we need to realize that Jesus wanted us to get something. He didn't just suffer, he suffered for us. We can look upon it and say, my gosh, it is so incredible that he took upon himself such suffering, that he was mocked by the very creation that he loved, that he was beaten by those whom he created. But as we watch that, we need to realize it is the greatest love that we will ever know for our souls, that he chose to lay down his life, because he is that kind of shepherd that not only found us, but then laid down his life for us. And notice that he says, I lay it down my life. And then he says something so important for us to hear, because he's hinting at this is not the end. This is the greater news that's coming. I lay down my life only to do what? Take it up again. That ultimately what I'm coming to do is not merely to just go, wow, you guys are screwed. I'll be screwed for you. I'll be screwed with you. I'm going to die too. No, I have authority over life. I have the power to defeat death. I will not only lay my life down, I will take it up. And I will show that I can defeat the powers of this death, of this separation. No one takes it from me. I lay it down of my own accord. I have authority to lay it down and authority to what? Take it up again. It cannot be taken by any other. He gives it so that he shows what God is doing, that God is in control. And that means that as we come towards next week, we need to hear what Jesus is trying to help us see. He's in control. He's not only the good shepherd, he's the good shepherd who is the authority over all creation and over all of us as sheep. And realize, oh my, He is over death and life itself. And there lies that profound nature of the Good Shepherd, of that love for you. That it is coming from the one who, unlike any other, not only does care about you, not only seeks you to know you, not only can find you, but he's also the one who would give his own life. He's the only one who didn't deserve it. He's the only one who lived in perfect union with God. He was the Son, and he's come to provide that. And lastly, we see this, that the Good Shepherd has come, and to those who respond to his voice, he says he leads them into true life. Jesus said this, when he has brought out all his sheep, he described what he was doing. He's saying, this is what I've done. When he has brought out all of his sheep, he goes on ahead of them, and his sheep follow him because they know his voice. I am the gate. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and out. You try to imagine that it starts getting a little strange. You're trying to picture like the gate. Okay, now this is getting a little confusing here. Are you the shepherd or you are the gate? And what is this in and out? So we have to try to start picturing right here that back then it was as simple, and you can see this too if you travel much parts of the world, Ireland and Scotland, or throughout the Middle East. Still, much of where sheep are kept, it doesn't take a lot to keep sheep in. Like they're not that bright. It's not like they're going to hop the big fence, or get a key and figure their way out. No, there's no real gate that's even needed. Just a few objects that are there, a little bit of fencing perhaps, maybe just built from some stones. That's kind of where the sheep come in to be taken care of at night. They have to get out to the pastures, so they're going in and out. And the gate was just a general opening. And it would be the gatekeeper who was often the shepherd. They can be the same role. And where would they sleep at night? Right across the gate. So they were, in essence, the gate. And they would be lying right there to make sure and decide and control when the sheep go in and out between the pasture and their pen. And so he's saying that I am the shepherd and I am the gatekeeper. I am the one who is the gate. I am the one that provides for those who go in and out. Whoever enters through me will be saved. He will come in and out and go out and find what? Find pasture. The thief comes only to steal and kill and destroy. They hop over the fence. They try to come in and do harm. But they didn't come through the proper way. They're not the one who has the proper right to do that. They're not ultimately in that control. They're trying to come defiantly to destroy. I have come that they may have life and have it to the full. So he is describing here this transition of going in and out, and that he is in control of that transition that leads out to being saved, out to the pasture. He's the one who provides that. And he's declaring that he is that gate, if you will. And he says the thief comes only to destroy, that we have a spiritual enemy that is seeking our destruction. That we have one who wants to do this, to take us from becoming God's sheep, meaning that we now live in right relationship with him and we're under his care, to being those who will not glorify God, who will stay turned away from him, because that is what he's intent on. And that he would use us and abuse us by making us other than what we were created to be. And in this we hear that he is saying, I have come that you have what? True life. Not merely what you deem to be life as you know it, but to be out and reach the pastures where you will find what is true and nourishing and good. That is, he guides us to those pastures that provide true life. That is what God wants for all of us. That is what Jesus has come to be able to do. He says, I've come to find you. I've come to lay down my life for you so that you will never face separation. You are able to come in and out. And ultimately, I have come as the one who can lead you to that which will really provide and fulfill and be that which you will flourish. And this is the picture of who he has come to be. And you and I need to come and realize that goodness. This is why, the most searched of all scriptures in the Bible is Psalm 23, written by David himself, a shepherd, who writes these words. And I invite you, let's read these words aloud together. I'll put them up on the screen. The first portion of Psalm 23. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He makes me lie down in green pastures. He leads me beside quiet waters. He restores my soul. He guides me in paths of righteousness. For his name's sake, even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. That's the words of David, who started even before Christ had come to realize God had been the one who was meant to be his shepherd. And he describes even that rod and staff, it was that which would pull the sheep away from danger. Why? Because we are walking through the valley of the shadow of death. Even David had begun to grasp something that we dare almost avoid, which is that we are always living in the shadow of death. The Bible says that like in many respects, like that is our great enemy. It's the last great enemy. And we can talk and think all we want about positive ways to view death, but ultimately it is that which we live in the shadow of, we live in the fear in. And the scriptures tell us that what God has come and wanted to do for us is to break the power of living in fear of death. That is the thing that God wants to break over all of our lives. And he does it because he's able to pull us from that place, from that danger, and pull us into that path towards life. And that is why David is starting to just grasp that is the heart of God. It's the heart of God for you and for I to be able to come into that space. There's a story that I had read some time ago, and it's not from that far back. It's from just 2005. And it's kind of a striking story, and I've looked it up, and it's like, oh, it's true. It was out there in all of the news, particularly in the country of Turkey where it took place. And it was a group of shepherds that were taking a large flock of sheep, masses, because they represented 20 or so average sheep from every single family in their village. So they're taking this huge herd across the mountains. And at one point they come to this hillside, and they decided, okay, the sheep all seem a little bit like they're here, we're just going to go and have lunch. So they kind of walk across the hillside where they can still see the sheep, and they make lunch for themselves. And while they're eating lunch, one of the sheep walks right to the cliff's edge and then just steps off to its death. And they begin to realize, oh my, because like I said, one sheep, it's tragic. Even one, because it belonged to somebody. And you can imagine what they began to feel, but what unfolded got a lot worse. What unfolded is another sheep followed them, and then another, and then they began to just go as groups, and they moved until 1,500 sheep had walked off the cliff. massive loss. They could not stop. Why? It sounds so tragic. And we could say, well, because sheep are like really dumb. Until I think, you know what? I think God looks at humanity and says, actually, you might scoff, you might think it's tragic, but that's what he's watching all the time. That we are really just people who are just walking to our own demise, just following each other, just following whatever is common. How often are we really doing what we're doing and choosing our choices in life because everybody else is? Because nobody seems to know better. That's the seriousness by which we have to decide who's going to be our shepherd. Do we really hear his voice calling to us? For some of us, that's the most important decision that we've maybe even yet to make. For all of us, it's the most important decision we'll ever make. And that is to respond to Jesus when he says, I am not a good shepherd. I am the good shepherd. There is no one else. From before all of creation, God has intended that you and I would exist with him forever. That is what he's after. And yes, he knows us. He actually sees us. He actually sees you, and he wants you. You're valuable to him, but you're also vulnerable. And it's in that posture that I invite us to pray. And I'd invite you to consider, even now, inviting him to be the shepherd of your soul. Would you pray with me? God, we open ourselves to the reality that you see us as more valuable than we can imagine. Like we just know that we're so flawed and we're so human. We're in this condition that doesn't seem worthy of the care of one who would be so true and good and right. But you declare that we are valuable, but you also declare that we are vulnerable, that we really are like sheep. And if that's something you identify with, I invite you to just pray with me. Jesus, I welcome you to become the true shepherd of my soul, that you have sought to find me. And I recognize that now you, who has risen and declared your defeat of death and declared that there is new life, there is life beyond death. You have come and laid down your life. You have come to provide for my own shame and sin and separation. You bore that upon yourself. As you were crucified, you took upon yourself that separation. And I receive what you have done to forgive me and to provide for me and to atone for me. And I receive you to now be the shepherd of my life, who would lead my life. And that I would want to follow you as you described, that we and I would become a sheep who follows you into good pastures, into what is truly life. And so I entrust myself to you. Jesus, I receive you as that shepherd of my soul. And Jesus, I recognize that I have found myself often disappointed in this world, but to you I entrust myself as the shepherd. And that as we continue to learn how to try to shepherd each other, because you told us we're to feed sheep and care for each other as sheep, but I recognize that there is none like you. You are my only ultimate shepherd. And I will not let the disappointments of others keep me from trusting you. I declare you are the good shepherd. I pray these things in the authority that you've brought into this world that bears your life in your name. In Jesus' name, amen. Let's stand and respond and worship together.